Hello everybody, Dr. Christine Smith, and I have a really wonderful guest for you today who is by far one of my favorite motivational speakers and just speakers on life and perspective and learning how to get the most out of life. His name is Eddie Pinero, and he is the founder of Your World Within, which is a YouTube channel that basically addresses all of these. So I'm going to go ahead and invite him on here. I've been listening to his stuff for quite a while, and it just really helps me on the days where I am needing a little bit of a perspective shift. And if I had to pick one thing that I thought was the most important thing for health and longevity and managing any condition, it would absolutely be understanding how to work with perspective. And he has a lot of different things that he addresses, and that can be everything from understanding the cumulative effect of effort to perceiving the world as an ally instead of a foe. And it can just be a challenging thing sometimes when you're dealing with difficulties in your life and a variety of other things. Speaking of difficulties, I am just working on inviting him in through the tech here, and sometimes Instagram gives me a hard time, so there we go. Excellent. Hello, how's it going, Eddie?
Hi, Christine. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk to people about how to make their lives more full and better, because I think that is something that you're incredibly good at, is just helping people to kind of see through the autopilot that we can get stuck in and remembering what's actually meaningful. And so I'd love if you just take a little bit of time to introduce yourself and just how you ended up in this position of artistry that you now do.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I love your content and your, in a way, an approach to a similar topic, because I think it is an important thing. It's sometimes a challenging thing. I also love that you call it artistry. I think that's cool. I think like everyone's approach is in its own way artistry, which I don't hear a lot. And you said that before. I'm like, oh, I love it. But yeah, for me, it was, it truly was a matter of being observant and just sort of documenting the highs and lows of life. And it wasn't any more complex than that, than feeling really good and asking why and how can I replicate it, and feeling really bad and saying, okay, well, I don't like this. How can I mitigate it in the future? And, it's funny, like you start picking up little things you like, and I found that my medium was writing about it, speaking about it. And most importantly, that seemed to connect with people, because we're all doing different things, but like in a lot of ways kind of fighting through the same stuff or similar things. And so that to me, when I found that alignment, I'm like, this is it. So I really enjoyed it.
No, I think you have definitely found your niche and what you're good at. And I think I call it artistry because of the ways you're able to use metaphors to describe complex concepts to people in a really tangible way, whether that's, from running or athletics or entrepreneurship and different things, but just helping people understand ways of seeing, small things like the wind cooling you down at the end of a long run instead of pushing back against your face. And like those little perspective shifts tie back into everything having to do with our happiness in our life. And that ultimately ties back into our health. And that's why I thought this was relevant for a channel that's more oriented around health, is because if I had to pick one thing that I thought was the most important, that would be it. Like I can give someone all of the vitamins in the world, but if they are still under the perspective that the world is out to get them and they are just waiting for the next enemy to appear, they're not actually going to be able to absorb it. So that is where I find your way of kind of flipping the framework so important.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because everything comes down to a choice. And, when you're talking about this stuff, there's a lot of opportunity to sort of misinterpret and say, think happy and things are going to be wonderful, or law
Yeah.
of attraction, right? The boat on the wall means you're getting a boat. To me, it's a lot more fundamental. It's just like you have a choice to find value in things that happen in your life, and the good and the bad. And if you can sort of discipline yourself to take that second and look and ask those questions, I've come away with some of my most important breakthroughs, like in moments of pain and darkness and the stuff that we don't want to go through. And I think in a lot of ways it's because, I write about it, and I've trained myself to stop and say, all right, well, where's there good here when I peel back the curtains? And so to your point, like, if we can learn to do that, it's a beautiful thing.
Well, and I'm really glad that you brought up the point about it's not all just like think positive, right? I think a lot of people get hung up on that. And I think what it really comes down to is allowing yourself space to feel all of it while also not getting stuck in it. And exactly like you said, like remembering when you do feel good, like, well, exploring that, like, what was it that made me feel good? Like, what was my mindset? How was I perceiving things? How was I looking at it? All of those are what mattered the most for feeling great, even when you're in the process of like all of the microscopic little steps of the destination, which can sometimes be the hard part that feels like you're wandering around with a blindfold on, but ultimately we all kind of are.
Yeah, right. I remember this helped in some ways, but Trevor Moawad had a line. He was Russell Wilson's trainer, and he passed away, but he really proposed the idea of neutral thinking, and like not letting the lows bring you too down and the highs bring you too high, but really asking yourself, being almost, you don't want to say remove the emotion because there's some beauty in emotion, but like sometimes you need to be pragmatic and saying like, all right, look, we're down by 7 points. We have 30 seconds on the board. Win or good or bad, doesn't matter what needs to happen. And I find that, pulling from that has been valuable as well, just sort of keeping that at the forefront of my mind.
Absolutely. So if I was going to ask you what you think is one of the most important parts for creating healthier perspectives for yourself, because it's not an easy thing to do to flip your perspective, especially when you're kind of within a situation, but like what's been one of the most useful and most important things you've discovered for yourself in that process?
I think it's got to be the expectations we set for ourselves. Like if you feel like the wheels are coming off the wagon, or things aren't the way they're supposed to be anytime you have a down day, or you lose, or things don't go the way you want them to go, you're going to feel bad about yourself. And you're going to feel less than. And so if I had to put it in sort of one thing or one idea, it's that mental shift of, the discomfort and the bad things and the lows are the quarter you put in, to use a metaphor, to get the gumball out. It's the cost of admission. And don't be so hard on yourself. It's like, I think it might have been Socrates. I don't know. I hate quoting these sort of generic things because they're, but the best way to avoid criticism is do nothing, say nothing, right? It's like you can avoid so much discomfort and pain in your life by locking yourself in your room. But do you want that? And obviously not, right? So I think the turbulence of life is an indicator that, hey, you're out there and you're making progress, even if it's small, and you're getting up repeatedly. You're doing these things that in the moment, because you're doing them, you don't see it as some awesome thing or some remarkable, remarkable action, but you're in the dance. You're doing the thing. And it's a good thing to remember.
I think about that a lot. I think there was an interview with someone who, is quite achieved in our world in the financial realm, and they were asking essentially, what do you miss the most in this journey? And it came back to like, he's like, I missed the grind. I missed the figuring it out, and I missed the parts that I viewed as hard during the time. But like, once you finally achieve your goal, you're going to look back on those as the most memorable times of your life. And I try to remind myself of that often. And, a lot of what I do now came out of going through my own experience of dealing with injury and going through that weird identity crisis of not feeling like yourself. I know you've dealt with injuries as an athlete as well. And I think that's something that gets really skipped over in our society, is just talking about the opportunity that comes with hardship, because it knocks you out of what we kind of know as our autopilot state, or what in the neurological community we call the default mode network, which is like the part of you that is operating on just like regular routines, and you're in such a routine that you might be a little aware of it for a moment and then you sink right back out of it and you forget. And that's what makes it so hard to change habits. So when you have a hardship, it can be this profound time to look back on your life and kind of restructure your priorities. And we don't always get those all the time. So I want to remind people that, you know, if they are going through something like that in their life, it's actually quite an opportunity. And yeah, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that, because I think that's where you are amazing at speaking to these things.
Oh, I appreciate it. And I'm right there with you. Like the importance of that. I just think one of our biggest misconceptions is like when we are in that spot of like when life feels mundane at best, that we think there has to be this sort of massive action that needs to take place. And like so much of the time, it's a little thing, it's a little tweak, like it's manufacturing momentum in your own life. You know, and I can give you two examples, very recent. Like one of them is over the past, I want to say 3 weeks, felt that a little bit, where it's just like, you know, you're doing the thing, but it's becoming, you start to feel like a hamster on the wheel. And just this little idea of running to the beach every day and making sure I jump in. And like, I don't know why, if it's like the process of running there, like feeling like more outside in tune with nature, feeling like I'm leaving the confines of my office one extra time. I'm not sure what it is, but it's just right away I started to wear this different mindset, and it's an incredible thing. And then similarly, one of my good friends was going through something like that. And, you know, so I recently linked up with him. He lives in Arizona. He's like, I need to, you know, break myself down. Like, we need to, do you want to do something crazy? And so we did this thing that we refer to it as a broken marathon, where for 24 hours straight, you run 1.1 miles at the top of the hour, every hour. And it was a blast. I mean, it was hard to go through, especially like you're talking 1 to 4 a.m., like not sleeping and you're stiff and cold and all those things. But the whole point is it puts perspective on everything else. Like the second we were done and, you know, high five, hugged each other, moved on, it was like you look at everything else you've been doing differently. And so I guess long story short, it's a very long-winded way of saying there are plenty of ways to manufacture that momentum in your life. And it doesn't have to be huge, but it is on you to look around and say, what's something small I can do that will excite me or invigorate me, anything along those lines.
No, I completely agree. And, you know, those little steps this may have been you, or it may have been somebody else, but the idea that even if you can't do the large thing that you're aiming to do that day, just showing up, even if it's for 5 minutes, and just making that a regular thing in your life and normalizing just showing up for whatever it is, even if it can't be the idyllic version. And then this is how we start to create different routine in our lives, and how we start to trust ourselves more. Because I think that is one of the things people forget about, is it's really easy to show up for other people and then disregard yourself. But if you start disregarding yourself, you start not believing yourself when you say you'll do something, and it makes it that much easier to not follow through on those other things in the future. And that can be eating healthier, it can be exercising, it can be your business, it can be how you show up in your relationships. But ultimately, like, all of those come back to our relationship with ourselves. And I think that's a lot of what you speak to, and being able to perceive your relationship with yourself in a disciplined yet forgiving way. And it's that balance.
That's so beautifully said. It's like it's balance. The first time I came into contact with this, like in a big way, it was Stephen Pressfield. I know a lot of people come across, you know, the War of Art, where it's like, you know, I'm a writer, And so I sit down, but there are days where I'd be like, I tell myself I would, and I just break promises to myself. I'm not going to do it today because I don't have an artistic idea, or like there's nothing of value. Tomorrow we'll be back. And basically his theme is like, no, you're breaking a promise to yourself when you do that. You sit down and you write, and you trust that you will when you say you will. And the weird thing is, not only do you get in that routine, and obviously that creates compounding that can change your life, but some of your best stuff comes when you sit down with seemingly nothing to say, you make yourself produce. So yeah, that was the War of Art was like the beginning of a new relationship with myself. I realized how important it is that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Not to other people, but to me. Yeah.
Well, and I went and snagged one of my favorite quotes from that book because it's an
Did you?
excellent book. I did. And it's the more important a call to action is to our soul's evolution, the more resistance we will feel towards pursuing it. And I have always found that to be very true and very interesting. And, I think a lot of people may wonder, like, why? Well, if you're being called towards your soul's evolution, like, why do you have resistance? And I just, I'm going to get a little bit nerdier. I know you usually do more artistic, but on the nerdier side of things, it's a biochemical thing. So when we are living in our patterns and living in our lives, our brains and our cells are used to producing a certain type of chemistry, and you literally get addicted to that chemistry. You can get addicted to being depressed. You can get addicted to being anxious. You can get addicted to being anxious because it makes you feel safe, because if you're not worrying about something, then it makes you feel like you're not looking out for yourself. And if you can start to practice these other ways of being where you're like, you know what, I'm okay, like I don't need to worry about that, your body and your brain then learn this as like a new way of being. But this is why when we're going towards the unknown and going towards something big and new, and it seems daunting or scary because we don't know what's on the other side, we can have such a profound resistance to it, myself included. And I think that is a very human thing. But the awareness of this and conversations like these, and learning how to see your mind as this thing that you as a being are observing rather than the thing that is running you, is the door to the idea of consciousness and living your life in a conscious and intentional way.
Yeah, and to me, like just the idea of knowing that I'm supposed to feel resistance is powerful. I love that you brought the biology into it, like, because I have I've dabbled, obviously can't even come near your depth on this, but like just for me there was comfort in understanding that our brains are still wired for tens of thousands of years ago. And so a lot of these things, criticism meant ostracization, which meant death. We're preconditioned to not go into the dark cave. And so like understanding that the world around us has changed, and how we feel is not always what's best for us. And so being able to separate the two, that's cool. Like sometimes it really is nice, just like it almost feels like an arm around your shoulder, knowing like you feel worried, you're nervous, you're unsure, but you're supposed to. It's like, okay, I get it now, because it's a hard thing to feel.
Gives you permission to just move through it instead of have your mind steer you away from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the realm of what we're talking about, I had sent like a couple little things I had come across and just listening to some of your work. And I think the one that we're speaking of, one of the ones that stands out is you had mentioned the mind is like water, like it's necessary for life, but you can drown in it. And I would love if you'd expand on that, because I think it is so true, and it's so easy to drown in your mind on a regular basis in that autopilot that we were talking about, because no one has ever talked to you about the concept that you are not your mind.
Yeah, to me, like that duality has always fascinated me, that fine line, and it's applicable to everything. It's like without routine in your life, it's very hard to function. Too much routine, you feel like you're in a cage. Like you push or you don't push into the unknown, you don't put yourself in uncomfortable situations, you won't grow. But you go too fast, it's reckless, and you're not taking with you the structure that you need. So there's so many things that, as we're growing and trying to, navigate our own lives, it's like understanding that there is that sort of push-pull.
Yep. Well, and I know I had someone wise say to me at one point, we often know exactly where we're supposed to go. Like, we can see it. We know where we're supposed to be or where we want to be. And we can get really hard on ourselves for not being there as quickly as we'd like, whether that is in a physical realm or a mental realm or a business realm, but that there are developmental steps in between. And we forget about the developmental steps, and that those
we
are
want to
the
skip
journey.
all that.
Yes, exactly. And it comes back to that classic, like, enjoy the journey, which I know people write off because they think it's so simple, but it's true. It's like there is no destination. And when you realize that we're all just figuring it out and nobody else really has it that much more figured out than you. What did you say in one of your speeches? Adults are just children with mortgages, I believe.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, it's the truth. We're all just trying to, to piece it together here little by little. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, because when you talk about having that answer, like the top of the hill, like when you got to where you were, I believe I saw in one of your videos, did you change career paths? You talk about that?
It's been a bit of a journey. I'm not in the exact position I thought I'd be in previously, but over the last few years, the world had some other plans, and I'm actually in the middle of reading a book called The Surrender Experiment, which is an amazing book by Michael Singer, if you've never read it. And it basically talks about how he gave up what he thought to be his personal preferences and just surrendered to the flow of life. And that has been a lot of my life in the last few years. And just continuing to be around people that I like spending time with, and getting brave and reaching out to people that I admire, and just showing up continuously, even on the days when I am not feeling my best, which is really humbling sometimes.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I haven't read it.
But it's excellent. I think you'd enjoy it.
I will. It'll be an audiobook for the run. But one of the things that I've noticed, because similar to you in the respect that I didn't see myself here, like I had to really dabble and explore and understand what I loved to do. And not only that, because there's things that I love to do that don't add value, right? So it's that mix, but learning what to say no to, or what I wasn't going to do, arguably was the most important stuff. Like the biggest light bulb moments were you don't like doing that, and by the way, you don't have to do that. And anytime you do that, you can take a little step closer to the stuff that does matter. And when you say like skipping the stuff in the middle, like that to me, it's that quote. I quote it all the time, not all who wander are lost, J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, I don't know how you can find yourself in a place of value if you're not willing to take the time to explore a little bit. I remember graduating college and everyone's like, they know what they want, and like, know what they want, right? You have to know. You have to pretend to know. You have to have some type of idea. Or maybe you think you do. But it's like you haven't even stepped foot out into the world yet. Like, let life in. Let yourself learn. And to me, that's where the magic happens.
Oh, absolutely. And, I did the same thing. I took time off before I went to grad school and lived abroad for a while and traveled and worked and really thought about what was meaningful to me and like what I actually wanted to do. I thought the traveling would get rid of my travel bug, but no, it just made it worse. But that's okay, because now it's made me realize that that's one of my core values. And there's another wonderful book called The Values Factor by John DeMartini. And it is all about figuring out what your core values are and then designing your life around it. And I think that has been a lot of what's been happening lately, is just figuring out that I actually love teaching people, and I love creating containers and transformative spaces and shaking people out of their autopilot and their default mode network and reminding them of the depth of life and of themselves, which is why my practice name is Depth Wellness. That's where that came from, is I wanted to help people remember the profundity of this experience that we are having, even if it's as simple as like walking on the sidewalk and watching the clouds. And I know it can seem trivial, but I actually think it's incredibly important, because that goes back to what you were saying around, like, it doesn't have to be this giant life event. Sometimes it can be that moment where, you know, you're standing at the street and then you realize that you're not even in your body, you're like out somewhere in your mind, and then you come back to being present and everything just seems incredible, because it is. Like, the fact that we're all here on this planet surrounded by nature and trees and the creation of mankind, and that it's all a trivial moment in the universe that's about this big in comparison to everything else, it just brings you back to this humbling place of realizing that you should enjoy it as much as you can, and also know that there's hiccups, but the enjoyment, I mean, the diversity and the contrast is what makes it rich.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, the trivial things are packed with that. Like, that's where, to me, that's where you find a lot of the good stuff. I would think it was cliche, like the idea of a gratitude journal. Like, I've grown into a lot of things over the years, and that was one of them, because it's like, really, I'm going to sit down and write what I'm grateful for. But I've got in the habit of doing that, and like, its value is so simple. It's like it teaches you to move away from lack and look at what you have. And it's when you go through your day with that mindset. Like, one of my friends, I haven't read the book yet, but there's it might be called The Gap Versus the Gain. I don't want to butcher it, but we're going into my apartment complex, and the gate wouldn't open. And we had things to do. I was in a hurry, and I'm like, like hitting the car, and he's like, Eddie, in his southern accent, he's like, you're living in the gap. He's like, a lot of people would like to live here. And I'm like, right. Gap versus gain, right? When you think about just how lucky we are to have the very basic things in our lives. And if we don't stop and really enjoy them, you miss it.
Yeah. And, for anybody where you're going through a hard enough time that it's hard to find those little pieces to be grateful for, if we go back to like the nerdy biochemistry and physics and all that stuff, when you start to take time to go inward and experience gratitude, even if it's just like for clean drinking water, right? It can be as simple as that. That experience of gratitude and using the power, this like grandiose power of your mind that research has now shown that we think that the brain works in multiple dimensions and your thoughts aren't even contained inside your head. When you go and you use the power of that to focus on one specific frequency, one specific vibe, which could be, that of gratitude, which is considered a high frequency emotion, we're all made of frequency and tone, and that's just physics. And you start to resonate that frequency with all of the cells in your body, and everything in your body becomes more coherent on like a physical level. And when you become more coherent and your cells become more coherent, which means that the signals don't have static, as a very simple way of saying it, that means that you're more clear in the signals that you're sending to your cells. And this is important for how you resonate with yourself, how you resonate with your environment, how you resonate with other people, and how your body can enter a healing state and your cells can stop operating in a chaotic way, and the intelligence of your body can start to come into a more balanced state. So simply from that practice of just resonating in that frequency of that particular type of emotion, the entirety of the rest of your world starts to become more ordered and coherent. And I think that's why what we're talking about is so dang important, is because it is the fundamental thing that everything else operates on. And there's people exploring this work and showing it in research, like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who studies frequency all the time and is literally showing physical changes in people's bodies that can't be attributed to anything other than their mind. And that has always blown my mind. And in my work, I tend to follow the things that make me say, wow. And that's just one of those things.
Yeah, that's incredible. I didn't know that. But it makes a ton of sense. It's like I'm looking back at, I call the morning my little hinge that swings a big door. Because anytime I don't get up early and have that gratitude and that reflection, to your point, like there's not that baseline to carry throughout the day. And so, yeah, it's cool to hear a little bit about the why.
Well, and I think one of the reasons I enjoy your work so much is it's like, yeah, you can have that moment in the morning, which is incredibly important for me too. But where I've been getting really humbled in my own practice lately is like, I'll do the morning thing and then I will slip right back into autopilot where I'm like, okay, check, like I did the thing. And it's this realization that it's like an every 5 minutes thing. So sometimes in the middle of my day, I'll go for a walk and listen to some of your stuff. And it helps bring me back to that feeling that I was remembering in the morning. And it's this constant coming back to yourself, which I think is the practice that we're discussing. Is you can get pulled away by society. You can get your reality flipped by a life event. You can kind of be molded by society to view things from a very narrow perspective, and that you have to do something in order to be considered successful or to be happy. But that can look different for everybody. So really the only thing you need to do to be happy is ask yourself what makes you happy. And people forget to do that.
I love that. Why? Because it seems trivial, but like you are your own experiment, and there's so many things. And I think that's one of the reasons why like these conversations are awesome, because they delve into different ideas and your perspective and my perspective, but there's no right way to live your life. Like we can talk about things that have worked for us, and certainly you can delve into the biology of why things happen the way they happen. But we're all so different that it's like you have to be vulnerable enough to explore a little bit and be okay poking around at those things that will make the difference. And to your point, like if for us, the morning is this crazy, awesome time. When it's 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I don't know why I said crazy awesome, but awesome time. When it's 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you can sort of pull that back up. And, what is that for you? Is it a run? Is it listening to music? Is it stepping outside? Is it a 15-minute nap? Like, what is it? But that's for you to understand.
Absolutely. And I think we have to give ourselves permission for that, which is, I think, why I want to expand your work more to more people, is because you have this way of giving people permission to like live their best life, and to also have hardship, and to also be okay coming over that hardship and not staying in a place of victimhood, which I think is also a weird mindset that sometimes our society gets trapped in, where there's almost like this badge of honor to it. But ultimately, that badge of honor doesn't stay shiny for very long, and it's much better to come back to feeling empowered again. And when you can realize that like you are not your mind, and you don't have to do anything that anybody says you have to do, and it's more just about making your life exactly what you want it to be, and figuring out how you can make that work and kind of reverse engineering it. It's like that is where the richness of it is going to lie. And that can be like, you can live in the woods if you want, you can live in the city, you can spend your time creating, you can spend your time reading, but ultimately there will always be some way to make your life work. But it's snapping out of the, like, I'm just going to say again, autopilot. Like, I can't think of a better word for it, where you're not even in your body. It's like you're just, your body is doing things, but your mind is completely elsewhere. And like, that's okay in like a daydreaming sense sometimes, but it's also the balance of coming back to the present moment and actually being present in your life. And, there's that idea of we're more energetic beings having a human experience, and it's that moving in between them and moving in between the worlds and appreciating both, of when you can kind of be like exploring and absent in your mind, but also completely present in this physical realm. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I love that idea, and it's something that I want to give people permission to explore.
Yeah, and I'm happy you touched on that because I feel like that personal agency is in many ways like in direct conflict with some of the cultural stuff now. And the only reason I like to hit on it is because like primarily I feel like it's younger people that are really immersed in this, grow up in this, where it almost becomes like uh, victimhood stuff. And it's like, it might feel good in the moment, or it might feel like you're getting your attention now, but I promise you're not solving a problem. That attention and that patting on the head and that poor you, yeah, it's not your fault, it's him or her. It's not going to get you to look around and say, how can I fix it? And, if I could scream that from a mountaintop, I would, because I see so much of it. I see so much of it. And people don't realize, like, I quote Will Smith all the time. We didn't all start the same place, but it's all our responsibility what we do now. That's how you change your life, not by getting attention for your circumstance. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because I do, and particularly young folks, I just think it's such a powerful thing to understand.
Oh, more than anything. And, this is a practice. Everything that we're talking about is a practice, and it's hard and it takes a lot of effort. And I was teaching a client about meditation once, and she's like, well, when I go into that quiet place, like, it's hard and I don't like it and it doesn't feel relaxing. And I was like, well, it's not always relaxing. Personal work is work. Like, it's hard. But if you give yourself a chance to do that, while also allowing yourself the grace to go through the developmental stages of it, which may look like, I am going to be super aware of this thing that I don't think I really want to do anymore, that I'm still doing. And I'm just going to be completely aware of it while I do it for like the next 2 years. And it can look like that. And sometimes you finally reach that breaking point. You're like, okay, like I've finally had enough. And then that is when you're moving out of that developmental stage. But that's the pieces that we're talking about, is like becoming aware of it. So it's like, you might hear this and you might not think much of it, but it might kind of just nibble at the back of your mind for like the next 6 months. And then you might start to become a little bit more aware of like how you're living your life and being like, I don't actually like doing that thing that I'm doing every single day. What if I did it a little bit differently or at a different time of the day? And then you start getting playful with your life and your schedule, figuring out different ways that you can piece things together, or coming up with options for yourself. You're like, well, if I can't do the big thing I want to do, I'm going to do it in this way, in a small version, so that you allow yourself what I like to call flow time. Because I know for myself, like, I tend to run in a way too high speed kind of state or a more anxious place if I don't allow flow time in my life. So when I'm scheduling things, I usually schedule a 20-minute gap, 30-minute gap in between, just to allow myself time to transition my mind or my physical body or whatever I need to do. But if you have any thoughts around that, I'd love to hear them.
Well, similar idea, like having your antenna up and asking those questions. There's Cal Newport wrote a book called Deep Work, where he delved into like your specific approach. And for me, like, I need that sort of quiet time to write and be, not distracted and totally immersed in what I'm doing. And then there is a switch, where it's like I am on podcasts and doing lives and doing stuff that's like very much the opposite. It's like quick pace and conversational. I'm not sitting in the corner writing anymore. And so that balance has been a valuable thing, and a lot of tweaking. Like, I can say way further along in terms of what feels right for me than I was 5 years ago. But I know in 5 years things will be different too. Things are always changing, and I'm okay with that, and I'm looking for that. And I guess long story short is life does not have to fit in a box. So just sort of always be willing to adapt and not be so hard on yourself as you do it.
Absolutely. And I know for myself, in running a business and things, I have learned to say there are no mistakes in business, only pivots. The only mistake that you can make in business is never making a mistake, because then you never pivot. And pivoting to the reality of what's going on is how you become successful. And it may look nothing like what you thought. And that has been kind of the interesting thing with doing this bit of a surrender experiment in my own life and just stopping trying to go through the doors that are shut and just going through the ones that are open and seeing what comes of it. And it's been really interesting just to kind of see how things unfold. But I guess if I had one other question, it would be kind of, what do you do in your own life when you find yourself getting stuck in that autopilot? Like, how do you break free of that? I know, like, for myself, I've been trying to find different mechanisms in my life I can use as tools for that. And I've been trying to get better with my evening routine. And so I know that for myself, if I am being pulled towards, watching TV in a mindless way versus a intentional way, if I go and I brush my teeth and I take a shower, sometimes it'll kick me out of that and it will then reset me and allow me to choose what I'm doing next. Maybe that's reading a book or something. So those are tools that I've been exploring for myself. But if you have any tools you like in your own life that other people can benefit from, I'd love if you'd share.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that. For me, I mean, it's simple, or similar, I should say. What I try and do is uh, really simplify the equation. Like when I'm struggling, and I don't know how many people will relate to this. It's usually because I have these expectations for myself throughout the day that are just impossible to hit. Like I say I can do more than I physically can, and then I go to bed at night feeling incomplete or like I didn't do as much as I could. And so for me, it's always like simplifying. Listen, what are 3 things that you need to do that you can hit that's manageable so that when you go to bed at night, you feel like someone who targeted goals and then hit them, right? That to me is important so that from the business side, I have that sort of cohesive, moving in the right direction feel. And then from the personal standpoint, it's what I mentioned before. It's stepping outside my world even for a minute. It's going in the water. And when I'm in the water, not letting myself think about work, even if I'm excited about it or I want to, no, it's like just enjoy it. Look around, call your friends, your family, just whatever it is, something that is will just get you feeling good and create that little snowball effect.
Well, and I think what you're talking about is mental boundaries, which is probably one of the most slippery things there is. And it is really hard to be aware of, and it's really hard to keep track of. But it is probably one of the most important things around, is like learning how to create healthy boundaries for yourself between your personal life and your work and your more expanded mind and different relationships, and that taking a moment to not allow yourself to think about work and to go be present in the waves and in the water, like that is a skill. That's a skill that we have to practice and foster and nurture. And that's the idea of what we're talking about. Like I talk about, meditation on my channel and stuff, but I think it's one of those things that sometimes people have a hard time connecting with because they feel like they just have to like sit in silence and be perfect. Where I'm like, no, like what we're talking about right now, that going into the water and not thinking about work, that is meditation. And it is that practice of mental boundaries and learning how to train your mind like a stallion rather than being succumbed to it. And I think if you can learn how to train your mind in that way, that is when you can shift between things. And and there's interesting concepts like the difference between like the male mind and the female mind. And I know for myself, I have to allow that flow time between activities. Otherwise, my mind has a hard time putting up hard walls. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that as a counterpart.
Yeah, I have a hard time going from, like, for me, it's the creative stuff to the not so creative stuff. Like using the same term, like it's the deep work to maybe the administrative things or stuff like that, because you have to be in such a specific place to be able to write or pour your thoughts, your emotions, your heart onto the paper. And so yeah, I usually have like a little bit of a balance, but it's a lot easier for me to go from the deep work to the other stuff than it is the administrative stuff to the deep work, which is why, and this is no secret, it's the first thing I do. So, I find that as the day goes by, the odds become greater and greater that I'll go, I can't, right? It's like, no, you have to first thing in the morning get this stuff done. And then you can do the things that require less brain power, so that's kind of how I look at it.
No, I love the concept of the morning for output and the evening for input. I think that's like a really gentle way to be able to work with yourself. And I did an exercise not too long ago that was about kind of scheduling my day, but scheduling the emotions and the feelings that I want to have at different times in the day. And I noticed like the morning I wanted to feel expanded and open and creative and reflective. And then in the afternoon, I wanted to feel, organized and looking forward and looking past. And that was actually a really helpful way to organize my day and help me figure out where I could put different tasks in so that I was organizing my life around how I work as a person, which has been a journey in figuring out in itself. But I want to make sure to honor plenty of your time. And I know there have been a couple people that came into the questions. One of them was asking about like yoga versus meditation. And I think, ultimately, I think they're very similar, but have their own purposes. But if you would want to speak to anything in your life about, where you find like meditation, exercise, and things like that, I want to allow some space for you to comment there for people. And then also just if you have any particular stories or insights that you want to share as we come towards our wind down.
Sure. Yeah. The yoga versus meditation for me, I'm happy to share my experience because it is very specific and it's helped me a lot, but it's through my experimentation, So when I do yoga, like anything that you're doing that's challenging, and yoga for me is very challenging, it forces you to be present. And so in a way that is meditative, right? But I don't view it as like, it's not, to me, it doesn't feel the same as when I sit down in the morning and close my eyes for 10 minutes. Like I really view it as like a physical thing, an injury prevention thing, hot yoga, something that I leave and just feel cleansed. So, and that'll vary from person to person, but that's how I utilize it as a tool. And then, in terms of like a message, if I had, one message to leave, or one message I tell my younger self starting out, because this is coming up on a decade now that, I've had the podcast and the YouTube channel and been sharing stories. I think I would just tell myself that it's okay to not know. Like I often reference that Nietzsche quote, those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who couldn't hear the music. It's like everything of value doesn't exist until it does. And you have to be okay sort of stepping into that chaos and saying, people aren't going to get it. There's going to be days where I question myself. But as you continue through it, it materializes. And that's probably the most important thing I could share.
I just want to re-emphasize that for a second in case anybody didn't fully catch that, because I thoroughly agree that there is something incredibly humbling about not knowing what's coming next, or kind of only seeing that vague outline and not knowing exactly the steps to get there, but just kind of coming back to trust and trusting yourself and trusting the universe. And I've spoken about this concept before because I think it can be really easy to get stuck in a place of feeling like you don't know where to place your trust because the universe is unpredictable and other people are always going to have their own needs, and you are never going to be able to make the perfect decision because it's impossible, because you can only make the best decision you can with the information you have at the time. But the one resounding, unshakable place that you can place your trust is in your ability to figure it out and get back up. And that, I think, has been one of my greatest realizations, and exactly what you're talking about is that, like, it's okay for it to be unknown, but like you will figure it out. You have every single time up until this point. And, I saw one other question I thought was good that said, what are some ways we can maintain mental boundaries? Like, when do I say yes, when I should say no? And I think it comes back to, one, exploring yourself, like we're talking about, to figure out what your boundaries are and what you are willing to put up with and what you're not willing to put up with, which I think is something else that you've touched on, right? Is it's like the more important piece is actually realizing what you need to take out of your life rather than what you need to put in. So yeah, if we want to kind of wrap up a little bit with exploring that thought, I'd love to hear your piece on it.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts similar, and it's like almost a brutal simplification that it's just incredible. It has been for me. It's two questions. One, what do I want? And two, are the things I'm doing throughout the day bringing me closer or further from that? Because when you do sort of an audit, you often find there's a lot of minutia in there that, you're saying yes to people that you don't want to be. You're spending time doing things that when you look around, there's not a real rhyme or reason for doing it. And it just helps you stay focused and linear when you know what you want, right? Greg McKeown talks about it in Essentialism. Like, the art of saying no is an art. It's hard, and it's hard for a lot of reasons. And so that's usually my response, is like, what's been very powerful for me in my life is distilling everything down into what matters, what am I doing, where is there things that don't, fit that narrative, and, making the necessary changes.
Absolutely. Well, I could probably talk to you for like 2 more days, but I want to make sure to honor your time.
Same.
I know you're busy, so thank you so much for taking the time to just chat. I love chatting with minds that talk about ideas. I think it is a way to evolve consciousness and evolve people's lives and help them make the most of their lives. So just thank you so much. And I guess any last thoughts to end with, or if you were going to direct people, if they wanted to learn more about you, where would you tell them to go?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you. I think you are brilliant, and I love the work you're doing. So I just want to make sure I got that out there.
Thank you.
But yeah, I would love for you to join me on the podcast or on YouTube. My name's Eddie Pinero, and the podcast is Your World Within. And would love for you to pop in and check it out. It would mean the world.
Yes. Highly, highly recommend it. It can just be one of those things that you flip on while you're taking your walk at lunch to help you come back to yourself and get out of the societally driven autopilot that tends to take away from the richness of our lives, and just remember the richness of this world that you're in and the wonderful people that you get to learn from, like Eddie. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hopefully a time in the future.
Back at you. Thanks, Christine.